As endurance athletes, we all have the more is better mentality. And I've kind of changed that to more is not better, better is better. Cycling, people don't think of really as a full body workout necessarily, but when you're out of the saddle sprinting, it's, everything is going into putting power in those pedals. So your ability to kind of lock down parts of the body that shouldn't move to allow the parts that do move is something that's I see neglected in a lot of strength training program. All these players do is, scrimmages and drills and skills, and that's fine. But if you don't have the conditioning to back that up, you're going to see a lot more injuries on the field and in our sport as well. Strength training just makes you a more durable athlete. It's an evolving process, and that's what I love about sport in general is just when you think you've figured it out, something changes and you got to figure that out now.
In this episode, I talk with strength coach Art O'Connor. Together, we discuss the biggest mistakes cyclists make in program design, Art's strength training history and influence, how he builds strength training programs for pro cyclists, youth cyclists, and general population, why throws and carries are so important in strength training, and how he uses blood flow restriction training for himself and for his athletes as well. Thanks to All You Need Nutrition for supporting this episode. All You Need is a French-made, high-quality supplement brand made specifically for athletes. So if you train hard but want to make sure you maintain a good balance between your vitamins and your minerals, or you want to supplement your protein intake with a high-quality whey product, use the code UPSIDE at checkout to get 10% off of your next order. And make sure you stay until the end of the episode to learn more about All You Need and why we decided to work with them. Now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Art O'Connor. Art, what's the biggest mistake you see cyclists make when it comes to program design?
It's kind of a loaded question, but I think the biggest thing in endurance sports in general is people try to make the weight room simulate what they're already getting from their sport. So, high rep, low weight. Cycling is by definition high rep, low weight. Like we're doing thousands of repetitions on every single ride that we do. So the last thing you need when you go in the weight room is more of that. So I look at strength training as almost like skill development in that we're going in to work on something very specific that we're not getting from our sport. So in our case, that means lifting heavier than we're probably used to, and lower reps than it would seem to make sense for people think, well, it's an endurance sport. We got to do more endurance stuff. Well, no, you don't. You got to develop the strength that you're not getting from the endurance that you're already getting from your sport.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting because the specificity has kind of two different sides to it, right? There's the specificity principle, the set principle of how the body adapts to specific demands. And then there's the idea of training that needs to be specific or not relative to a certain discipline, like you said. So it seems like, at least in today's world, and I guess it's a pendulum, it's going to swing back the other way at some point, but everybody's trying to, like you said, mimic their sport in everything that they do, right? Soccer players don't want to run without a ball anymore because everything has to be like the sport. Like you said, cyclists want to do low weight, high reps. Where do you think that's come from, and how can you try and fix that?
I don't know where it comes from, honestly, because but it seems to be getting worse. Like you seem to be seeing more and more of that. The gym that, our physical location, it's funny you bring up soccer because we have one of the other coaches there primarily works with soccer players, and he's fighting the exact same battle. All these players do is, scrimmages and drills and skills, and that's fine. But if you don't have the conditioning to back that up, you're going to see a lot more injuries on the field and in our sport as well. Strength training just makes you a more durable athlete. You see lower incidence of overuse injuries when you're stronger. You're potentially a little more durable if you crash, which is definitely part of our sport. But I think there's just, especially with recreational and kind of weekend warrior type athletes, we have a limited time to do what we do. And so I think that specificity comes from, well, I have to maximize the time that I have available to me. So I want to make it as sport specific as I can. And I think that's a big mistake because I think if you just get generally strong, the sport specific demands will kind of take care of themselves within your sport. So, low cadence stuff is kind of having a moment here in cycling. All the world tour teams are doing that stuff. And I think it's a great application. Um, but I don't think it works as a standalone. I think you have to develop that raw strength in the gym first, and then the low cadence work. I mean, it's better than doing nothing if all you ever do is low cadence work. But if you're combining that with your gym work, it's going to take you to, another level, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think what you're saying here is essentially taking a broader perspective on physical preparation and not just narrowing down on your sport and its specific demands, but I like to say, try to be an athlete first and a specialist second. Because, like you said, you want that broad base, you want the strength, you want to be explosive, even. And that's true whether you practice a specific sport, but it's true for Gen Pop people as well, right? If you want to just live a long life and be able to, catch yourself when you fall when you're in your 60s and 70s, then you need some basic strength. You need to maybe do some explosive work, and for some that might be just jumping up onto a 5 kilo or 10 kilo plate. It doesn't have to be the big boxes, the plyometric work and all that stuff, but just ticking all the boxes, right? And from what I understand, this is one of your foundations in the way that you approach things. Is let's look at all the physical qualities. We need the strength, we need the explosive side, we need to be able to use our core in an integrated fashion with the rest of our body, and let's just tick all the boxes and make sure that we have that strong foundation, right?
Exactly. The reality is most of us aren't going to win a tour stage, uh, or win a World Cup or anything like that. And, I'm fortunate in that I do work with a lot of high level athletes, but, the majority of the people I work with are, guys like you and me that want to go out and beat our pals on the weekend, or, win the local criterium, or the local mountain bike race in our age group. So going back to, like, you asked what a big programming mistake is. A big programming mistake for amateur athletes in particular is just doing exactly what the sport does in the gym and not looking at the gym as a way to work on the things that your sport is not giving you. Cycling is very quad specific. We overuse our quads in cycling. So in the gym, I want my cyclists to be doing a lot of glute and hamstring work to balance that out. We don't do a lot of upper body stuff in cycling. Cycling doesn't build a lot of upper body strength, but we need to be able to do some basic pushing and pulling movements. Push-ups and pull-ups being kind of the low-hanging fruit. Um, as you get more tip of the spear, like, I don't think, Jonas Vingegaard really cares if he can do a pull-up or not. You know what I mean? Maybe he can, maybe he can't. I don't know. I don't train him. But, the closer you get to the tip of the spear, then yeah, you do need to be very, very specific, and you can't afford to ignore, the things that your sport's not giving you, because, as a professional, you have a very limited window of when you can perform and, get those contracts, make that money, and move on with your life. But for the majority of us, we're doing this sport because we love it, and we're just trying to, live a healthy, active lifestyle. So we want to kind of, get the things that our sport is maybe not giving us in the gym.
And I guess one of the hard things is that when you're starting out in any kind of sport, the sport itself is going to be sufficient at the beginning to get you better, right? So you just practice the sport, you get better, and that's true for cycling. If you're new to cycling, just start pedaling and then spend some hours, you're going to get better. And then once you start to see diminishing returns, then maybe you do a little bit more cycling, and then you keep getting better. And that's true as well with I work a lot in the CrossFit world, and that's very true there as well, right? People that are new to this, they start and then it works well, and then it works a little bit less, so they do a bit more, and then it works better. But then you get to that point, and for some it's a year in, for some it's 5 years in, where doing more of the same is not sufficient enough to kind of get you over to that next stage. How to know when to shift gears and to start looking more broadly at what you need to do versus just doing more of the same?
Well, I mean, we both know, like, newbie gains are definitely a thing. If you take somebody that's never trained before in whatever sport it is,
Mm.
you just have them do anything, they're going to start getting better really quickly. And you see that in the gym a lot. When somebody hasn't been in the gym before, they're almost adding weight to their lifts every single session for the first couple weeks, maybe the first couple months even. So the time to shift gears is when you stop seeing those big leaps. And just because you're seeing those big leaps doesn't mean you should necessarily take advantage of those. And I'll kind of circle back to that here in a second. But when you start seeing those newbie gains start to slow down, then maybe it's time to look at, all right, well, what else can I do? Or how do I need to change my program to keep improving? And everybody has a limit of where they're going to kind of really stop improving. But in terms of strength, but we kind of see this weird thing when as you get progress in the sport, your efficiency goes up. Like I kind of had I'm having a bit of a head scratching moment myself in that some of my local climbs that I'm riding, I'm seeing times that I haven't seen in like 5 or 6 years, and I'm 20 pounds heavier. My FTP is lower, but I'm climbing better. So my efficiency is clearly coming up. I'm not reaching all-time PRs that I would have seen like 10 or 15 years ago, but it's an interesting phenomenon in that, the body is really good at kind of figuring out ways to kind of maintain or even improve without the most obvious mechanisms. Like, yeah, it would, if I was lighter and my FTP was higher, I'd be like, yeah, of course I'm climbing faster, but now I'm climbing better and I'm heavier and I'm, in theory slower. So,
And
um,
is the main thing that changed your strength numbers over the years, or are there other things that you've done that can explain that? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm in I work in a gym, so I'm in the gym every day.
yeah,
And I've really, I'll be 59 this summer, so I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And I'm trying to carry as much muscle mass as I can into my 60s because, just from a longevity standpoint, that's been shown to increase our health span. And that's what I'm interested in. Like, if I live to 100, great, but like whatever age I live to, I want to be mobile and be able to do the things that I want to do
Mm.
up until I take my last breath. Um, so like my goals are very different than like the professionals that I train in that, I'm just trying to improve as a human being. And, if I can improve as a cyclist as a side benefit, then great, I'll take that. But, it's an evolving process. And that's what I love about sport in general is, just when you think you've figured it out, something changes and you got to figure that out now.
Yeah, it's almost like the whack-a-mole, right? There's always something else that pops up, and it's not always the same thing. And even sometimes you think you've kind of mastered one aspect of it, and so you kind of put it on the shelf and go work on something else, and then eventually you realize, oh, actually, I need to come back to this because now since I've changed this has changed a bit as well. But like you said, it's one of the things that brings the richness of the world of sports, and I guess tied into self-development as well, right? Because sports is a facet of self-development, and with that comes obviously all the challenges. Going back to the strength side of things, and with the pros that you work with, is there such a thing as too strong for an endurance sport, in your opinion, and from your experience?
I wouldn't say too strong necessarily, but I think placing too much of an emphasis, like in my experience, like most people can get to like a 1.5 to 2 times body weight trap bar deadlift. But to get past that means more specific gym work and potentially less time on the bike. So there's kind of a point of, so I'm a big believer in being strong enough for your sport. Um, it would make my job really simple if like all I had to do was get somebody to a 3 times body weight deadlift and then they'd be winning bike races. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You reach a point where you'll reach a level of strength, and to get beyond that, you have to be really specific on focusing on the gym work and taking time away from your sport.
And I guess that's ties back into the program design side of things, right? Because we often hear those questions, oh, how many sessions a week should I do, and how strong do I need to get? But there there's no proper answer without the context that the person finds themselves in, which is, who are you? what's your history in sports? How many days a week do you have to train? How many sessions do you have available? What's the logistics of training, right? If you live super far from a gym, then maybe you have to take that into account in your schedule and try to make it work. And I find that once you add all that context and you ask the right questions, it's usually quite easy to figure out, okay, how much are we going to do and then for how long, and then balance that out with the other qualities. But it's almost impossible to answer in isolation, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, you do have to look at the big picture, and it's, you know, training professionals is actually really easy in that they have unlimited time and to do the training, so they can optimize their day around their training. You know, when you're dealing like, but again, you know, the majority of the people that I train are people with jobs and families and careers and, you know, obligations away from the bike. So then it does become a kind of a task of figuring out what needs to be added and what needs to be subtracted, you know, and that changes day by day, week by week.
Is that something you've always been interested in? Did you specialize yourself in that strength training for endurance sports early on, or how did it come about?
Yeah, so I got a degree in exercise physiology from the University of Utah, and I had a whole other career in finance before this, but I've always coached people on the side.
Mm,
Um, And you know, I've done everything from like writing full riding programs to strength training programs. But strength training has kind of always been, I wouldn't say my secret weapon, but it was something that I did throughout my entire cycling career. I mean, I was like a journeyman pro back in the 90s. It was, you know, no real results to brag about, but you know, I did pretty well for being a 6'7" guy in a sport of smaller people.
right.
And I attributed all of that to strength training. So I always did it, but like, you know, in the early 90s to mid 90s, people weren't talking about strength training as it related to endurance sports. I did it because to me, intuitively, it made sense. Like,
Mm,
well, I'm bigger than all these guys. I need to be stronger than them. You know, I'm fit, like aerobically, I'm fit, but like, you know, I still like when I was racing, I was about 185 to 190 pounds. You know, I have to carry all that weight up whatever hills we're going up.
right.
Um, so I always did the strength training side of things, and I shared it with a lot of my athletes, but most of them really didn't want to hear it and didn't and didn't want to do it. Um, and then about let's see, 2011 or so, I was kind of burned out on my. I worked in finance and just you know sitting in a cubicle all day was just asking you know the basic life questions is like is this what I do with my life and sort of thinking about like what does give me enjoyment, and coaching has always been something that's given me enjoyment. And I was looking for, you know, there's a lot of cycling coaches out there, and I didn't really see myself wanting to do that because I'd done some of it and just wasn't something I really enjoyed. But the gym was like I kept thinking, well, the gym is kind of what I really like. People aren't really doing it in my sport, but I think it's going to be the next thing in endurance sports. And, you know, it turned out I was way early on that. And I was swimming upstream in a lot of regards, trying to get people in the gym.
Mm.
And I've shared this story before on other podcasts, but in 2015, the year before the Rio Olympics, Nino Schurter released a video in that series that he was doing going for gold or something like that, where it showed his gym routine and he was doing all this insane stuff with like the pedalo and skateboards and like almost overnight my phone started ringing from all my friends and all my buddies that I'd harassed to get in the gym to start training for cycling. Yeah, like, well, God, Nino's doing it. um, and so yeah, you know, I've kind of forced got my way into a really fun niche in that like I was one of the early proponents of strength training for, you know, for cycling. I think intuitively, I think it's kind of always been there. Like I don't think, you know, I think certainly on the mountain bike side of things, like the World Cup guys had been doing a lot of strength training
Mm.
and maybe not talking about as much as they did. Clearly, Nino had been doing it for quite a while before he released that video. Um, and so it was validation to, you know, to have that video. And then it also, you know, it really grew my business. Like you know, I had a pretty good business going, just training general fitness people, and I enjoyed that. But you know, cycling is something that's always been a passion of mine. And to be able to share that with with other cyclists, and it's kind of grown into, I've been blessed to train a lot of really high level professionals. I work with a lot of high school athletes as well, and it's really rewarding on all levels. Like in a lot of ways, yeah, when Keegan wins a race, like I feel really good about it, and I'm really psyched for Keegan. But it's like Keegan's Keegan. He wins a lot of races. I get a lot more excited when like one of my NICA or high school athletes wins a race.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it's a great story to hear. To try and bridge both worlds, the strength side and the endurance side. Can you talk a little bit about your strength training influences over the year and where you've drawn some of the lessons, principles that you apply in your work?
Yeah, so I discovered Pavel Satsulin really early on.
Hmm.
So he has been a huge influence. I went through the Jim Jones certification system. Um, so I didn't work directly with Mark Twight very much, who was kind of the founder of Jim
Hmm.
Jones. Bobby Maximus was running the program when I went through it, and so I learned a lot from indirectly from Mark because he created the programs. Rob was, Rob McDonald was a great influence of mine, and just the whole Jim Jones kind of system really shaped me as a trainer. Um, but Pavel, yeah, Pavel and Jim Jones have kind of been the big ones. And then I look outside of my sport a lot because, I had to early on because nobody was talking about strength training as with regard to endurance sports. So I just kind of started looking at like, well, who are the strongest athletes in the world? And I looked, to Olympic lifting and powerlifting and kind of reverse engineered it there. Like, all right, well, I don't need cyclists to be deadlifting 700 pounds, but I can get these guys a lot stronger than they are, and it's going to help them in their sport.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Jim Jones. That was right in the kind of early CrossFit days. I remember the good old 10 minutes assault bike test.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you've probably gone through that one. It's interesting to think back to those days. And I remember for me, I had absolutely no understanding of endurance physiology and what we know now about intensity domains and everything that goes with it. And just thinking back to those days was interesting when it was all kind of new. But yeah, I remember those workouts. Those that famous video. I'll always remember when they switched the cables on the, I think it was the Concept 2 rower, and then you
Hmm.
would race against your buddy's screen essentially. So
Oh,
you wouldn't see your
such,
own numbers, and you would see your
yeah, super evil.
yeah. What were your main takeaways from all the education and learning you've done through the Jim Jones programs that you mentioned? What were the main things that you've come away with?
Well, from Jim Jones, just the ability, the work capacity that that people can develop.
Mm,
Um, I'm a fitness junkie. Like I watch the CrossFit games every year, and it's always impressive to me, like just the sheer volume of work
yeah.
that those athletes can get done in such a short period of time. And certainly through Jim Jones, they really push that envelope of like, let's see how far we can push this, and like really kind of taking you to the edge, and in some cases over the edge. Um, I certainly, when I was training there, I was doing things that I never would have thought I'd been able to do, and I certainly cracked myself. But it was a good experience because I saw, that you definitely can take it too far. And as endurance athletes, we all have the more is better mentality. And I've kind of changed that to more is not better, better is better.
Mm,
And so I took what I learned from Jim Jones and kind of refined it to what I was doing. And not to say that they were doing anything wrong. Um, but the contrast of that, like, Pavel's system is a lot more of, doing kind of the bread and butter work, staying in that kind of 70% range and just building a big work capacity there and only really, putting the pedal to the metal when it's close to a competition. It was a nice blend for me to kind of contract, use take from both of those camps. And in fitness we all do, we're all standing on the backs of giants, to get to where we are. Like I didn't invent any of this stuff. I just kind of made some observations and kind of tweak my programs, kind of borrowing from here or borrowing from there and just kind of conglomerating it all to one. And, I've had some success with it. And the great thing about fitness and training is there's a lot of ways to get to the same destination.
All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah.
If you had to describe your approach to strength training to somebody today who doesn't know you, how would you qualify it? What are maybe some of the, well, you talked about your influences, maybe some of your biases, some of your preferences. How would you describe it?
I mean, if I could distill my training into like a pithy quote, it's simple but not easy. So like I use a lot of really basic movements. I don't do like we talked offline earlier, the Instagram exercises. You know, it's all pretty meat and potatoes with me, push-ups, pull-ups, squats, deadlifts, step-ups, lunges, things like that. Um, for a number of reasons. I'm working with a population that kind of has a gym aversion, so I don't want to overwhelm them with a bunch of exercise, having to teach them a new exercise every time they get in the gym.
Mhm.
I want them to be really good at those foundational core movements, and the strength they develop from that, they're going to be able to apply specifically to their sport. I see people like having you do like a trap bar deadlift, like mimicking your pedal position, so like staggering your stance. And I mean, that's great and all, but like I just want you to be as strong as you possibly can. And I don't think you're going to get as strong as you possibly can doing a split stance or, doing standing on a Bosu ball or anything like that. Like let's just make it and as simple as possible to get in the gym and at least do it. The training you're going to do is going to be hard, but it's going to be very basic movements.
Yeah, what I like about that approach as well is that it essentially encourages you to learn a new skill, right? That is completely outside of your sport. And so if you just dedicate yourself to this instead of always thinking about the cycling or whatever you're going to transfer that skill to, it's again a whole new facet of your physical preparation that you can learn through and then develop. And I see that more and more now with how narrow preparation has become and how we said it before, specialized everybody is becoming, is that you actually want, especially I guess for the younger athletes, right? We need them to have a broader base, a broader understanding of movement. We need them to not only be good in this sport, but we need to for them to be good at skill acquisition as a meta skill, because then anything you bring to them later on, they're going to be able to pick up and go with. So teaching something as a complete skill that is outside of your sport has a ton of value, even just from that standpoint.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of in the process of changing the way I train my younger athletes, mostly due to the exposure that I'm getting with the coach that I mentioned previously at my gym that's training a lot of soccer players. Um, so, the cyclists that I train, people get it. I'm going to make broad sweeping generalizations here, but like,
We love
you
those.
know, I was not a ball sport guy. I was never good at ball sports. I was not really good at team sports. So I always found myself going to individual sports. And so a lot of the kids that I work with are same thing, like they didn't make the baseball team or they have no interest in football or basketball or soccer or whatever, but cycling was an individual pursuit. And so they may be really good at that. They don't have a lot of like athleticism per se. And so I want to really develop that because, working with the top level people that I work with, those guys and girls are all really good athletes across the board. Like they probably could have done, something in other endurance sports like Nordic skiing or running, or they have the engine. They just chose to apply it to cycling.
Mm.
Um, but they also, they're also very, they're strong, they're skilled, they're very coordinated people. Um, and I don't see a lot of that with a lot of my younger athletes, especially ones that just focus, on a single sport. And I encourage all the kids that I work with, be a seasonal athlete, play different sports. I mean, you can make cycling your focus, but try some different things. Skimo racing is a big thing out here,
Mm.
ski mountaineering. And I think that's a fantastic, way for kids to, to spend a winter versus sitting in their basement grinding out on Zwift or, Trainer Road or something like that, which are fantastic tools. But, when I was 14, that would have been the last thing would have wanted to do is just sit in a basement grinding away by myself, go out and have fun in the mountains with your friends. Um, so I think it's really important for younger athletes to kind of do a number of different things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, through an official team or anything, but just go out and, climb rocks, climb trees, swim, run, and so we're doing a lot more. I'm starting to add a lot more kind of coordination stuff and athleticism into my junior programs.
And I guess unfortunately, it goes with the times because kids are not playing outside as much as they used to, right? When we used to spend 4 hours every afternoon playing in the trees and playing outside and just throwing a ball around. But nowadays, there's less and less of this, unfortunately. But that's what is the basis for your athleticism later on. And so now we're having to integrate that into gym routines versus it happening organically. And I was talking with a colleague a while back who said that he thought that essentially the popular comeback of low intensity training was partly due to the fact that we were becoming very sedentary and the kids growing up were moving less and less. And so, whereas
Hmm.
before, when you were moving 4 or 5 hours outside per day, you had this broad base of conditioning that you could then apply to any sport, and you didn't need to structure that into low intensity training. But now, and obviously, if you're doing ultras and things like that, you need that work. You can't just go without it. But we probably need it more today because we're just less active, and that essentially eating up training time. Whereas if you had that foundation before, you could probably allocate your hours a bit differently.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And you kind of have to meet people where they're at. It's easy to say, "Oh, kids today are lazy. They don't go outside and do anything." But like, if I was a kid if all the stuff that's available to kids now had been available when I was a kid, like, yeah, I'd have been staring at my phone and
For
looking
sure.
at screens and doing all that stuff. But we didn't have it, so we didn't know any better. We just, we used what we had.
Mm.
These kids are using what they have. So yeah, it's probably from a sporting standpoint, it is a little bit harder as a coach because you're starting to work with kids that didn't have the childhoods that we had growing up, where we're just, outside running around like maniacs until it got dark every day because that's all that's what we had. So I think from a programming standpoint for younger athletes, it's important to really kind of address general athleticism, you know, lots of running and jumping. And cycling, like doing things like lateral, like direction changes. We exist, we live and die in the sagittal plane and cycling. Um, so I think it's a challenge sometimes, but it's also you can make it really fun. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing with kids, especially, is make it fun.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to come back to because you mentioned that word before when you said, kids just need to go play outside and have fun. And that's
Mhm.
also something I see, unfortunately, being pulled out of youth sports, unfortunately, a little bit as well, is that kids are, and again, broad sweeping generalizations, but kids are often now driven towards performance very early on, which sure, it can be interesting, but it's also pretty stressful, and sometimes it takes the fun out of it. Whereas, if I have a goal for any kid today is that he can train for the rest of his life and enjoy it, whichever training it is and whichever sport it's in, and it might evolve throughout their lifetime, but keeping that element of fun in everything that happens so that they want to come back, right? It's the goal is not that they do the crazy exercise today or they lift the most weight today or push the most watts. The goal is that they do it tomorrow and the day after and then the week after and then 10 years down the line that they're still doing it. The worst thing we can do is, push kids out of something because we've asked too much of them, right?
Yeah, no, the most heartbreaking thing that I see every year is kids that have come through the NICA. NICA is the U.S. High School Racing League for those who don't outside of the U.S. That go through that finish their last NICA race as a senior, and then they never race their bike or ride their bike again
Right.
because it's just been they've been pushed so hard to get those results for, for the high school season, that they just don't want to ride a bike anymore. I hate seeing that because, unlike, and I'm not throwing these sports under the like, unlike like football, like you're not going to play football after you graduate from high school ever again, probably. It's not a lifetime sport. Cycling is a lifetime sport, and to be exposed to that and have that gift given to you when you're that young, and then to walk away from it because you were just pushed too hard, to me is like the most heartbreaking thing ever. And yeah, I as a coach, I live and die by my athletes and, the people that come and pay me. It pays my mortgage. It puts food on my table. Um, but like I try to make my training as accessible and fun as possible. And I get these kids in the gym under the guise that, they're doing a cycling specific program, but I'm just making them strong so that if they decide, you know what, cycling's not my thing, I want to play soccer, or, I want to take up trail running or whatever. Now they have the strength to go and make that transition into whatever sport they want. Um, Using myself as an example, like ski racing was my big thing, but I played soccer in the fall, not because I was good at it. I was actually really terrible at it. But I knew it would keep me in shape, and I'd run around a lot, and it was, I had fun because my friends were there. But and in the spring I ran track because it was all of that was like because I wanted to be a better skier. I just wanted to stay fit and get strong and be explosive. And it's, kids that are kids that are specializing in a single sport is kind of heartbreaking because they just don't get exposure to things that they may find that they like better, or that they do better. Like, I thought for sure I was going to go to, be a collegiate skier and ski race in college. And turns out I ran track, Division I track in college because I wasn't as good of a skier as I thought. But because I had exposure to all these other things, I was able to transition to another sport at a relatively high level. And same thing with cycling. I started cycling because running broke me down so much that I couldn't run anymore. And
Mm.
I didn't want to just stop being an athlete. So I started riding a bike just for rehab, and found out I really liked it. And I was, pretty good at it pretty early on. So I just kind of ran with that.
Yeah, it's many experiences that just open doors, right? And show what's possible, and then let the kids go wherever they may over time. If we were now Art to take maybe three different case studies, if we want to take a professional cyclist that you work with, a youth cyclist that you work with, and then general population, can you give us a rundown of a typical strength training session that you would do for all three of them, kind of the main overall structure, what you're thinking about when you're putting it together, and then maybe the key differences that we might find between them?
Yeah. So starting with the professional cyclists, their gym work is going to be a little more specific in that, like any of my Grand Prix athletes, they don't need as much upper body strength as I would give to like a recreational cyclist or a general population person. So their workouts are going to be really simple. They're going to do, depending on the season, like in the winter or not race season, they're going to do some kind of hip hinge, either a squat or a deadlift every single session. And then they're going to do some kind of bilateral lower body movement, like a split squat or step up or something like that. Um, weighted carries. I have everybody do weighted carries. So lots of farmer carries, overhead carries, suitcase. Like we have a lot of different carries that we do. Um, then they're going to do for upper body for like a Grand Prix athlete. It's going to be really basic, like push-ups or pull-ups, or some variation of that. Like, some of my athletes like doing like dumbbell bench press or even a
Mm.
regular bench press. Um, like renegade rows, gorilla rows, things like that. So with my pros, like I kind of I know what they like, for upper body stuff, and so that'll kind of change, for the athlete. Now, a high school athlete, like I don't, like I said, I don't really give them a cycling specific workout. Like I'm just think it's more like a GPP program. Like I just want them to be strong across the board. We're still not really training for hypertrophy necessarily, but with junior athletes, they just get bigger anyway because they're growing. So I'm just trying to give them so they're same basics from, they'll do a hip hinge, they'll do a push, a step up or a lunge. But I'll have them do like more like Romanian deadlifts, glute bridges, things like that to really get more posterior chain. For upper body, they're going to do, you know, a lot of overhead with my junior athletes. Uh, we do a lot more pulling. So like I want all of my juniors to be able to do pull-ups, male or female. So we spend a lot of time on that. We do a lot of throws like med ball, things like uh, pushing a sled, we have a woodway
Yeah.
in our gym. So we have a woodway and a sled, but we do a lot of the kids like the sled more than the woodway for some reason. But so those are kind of the biggest differences between the two. And then the Gen Pop is going to look a lot like the high school athlete. It's going to be almost pretty much the identical program, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, it's meat and potatoes. And I think one thing that helped me a lot years ago when I started knowing Pat Davidson. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but
Yeah.
essentially just categorizing the different patterns and understanding that there's going to be a knee dominant lower body exercise, is going to be a hip dominant one, which you mentioned, and then you can
Mhm.
push and pull with the upper body. It could be horizontal, it could be vertical, and then you have the three planes of movement through the midline, and that's pretty much it. Right, then we can
Yeah.
add the explosive stuff and the sprinting and whatnot. But really, on the strength side, that's all you need to know. And then anything on
Mhm.
top of that, isolation and such, is just cherry on the cake. But really, if you want something solid, you just need to tick those boxes. And you alluded to it. The exercises don't really matter, right? And I
Yeah.
like that you said you know what they like. And
Yeah.
then actually working in what people like into the program is just such and I guess and I was like this at the beginning when I was, a young coach. You think you have to know everything. You think you have to have the answer to everything. Whereas actually, if you bring the athletes or the people that you coach into the thinking process regarding what they're going to be doing, they're a lot more invested into it off the bat. And so just
Yep.
giving I like to call it the illusion of choice, right? It's like, oh, do you want to do
Yeah.
a dumbbell bench press or do you want to do a push up? At the end of the day, the work is being done in the same pattern. And that's a really easy way to get somebody to do something, even if they wouldn't have done it maybe as willingly if you had prescribed it without asking them.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's funny, like the like my Grand Prix athletes and the pro athletes I train, like I never hear from them like, God, these workouts are boring and they're the same exercises over and over again. My Gen Pop and like the junior, like they kind of want a new exercise every single
Yeah.
time. And I have to coach them down from that. Like, I know you want that, but here's why we're not doing that. And I will work with them I don't, I do want to keep them engaged. So I'll throw some different exercises at them. But to your point, they're kind of the same. Just variations of the same thing.
Mm.
Instead of, we'll do, a dumbbell bench or like instead of a push up or, an overhead press, with a kettlebell instead of a dumbbell, just kind of mix it up like that. And it's really all it takes is just slight variations, on those themes.
You talked about using throws, med ball throws. What value do you
Mhm.
see in those exercises?
Just that full body explosiveness. Because, cycling, people don't think of really as a full body workout necessarily. But I mean, when you're out of the saddle sprinting, everything is going into putting power in those pedals. And so your ability to kind of lock down parts of the body that shouldn't move to allow the parts that do move is something that's I see neglected in a lot of strength training programs. And also, the explosiveness that you can generate through med ball throws or any type of throw or plyometric directly translates to our sport because cycling at the end of the day is it's an endurance sport, but it's power that wins races. Yeah. So that ability to go from like, 0 to 60 is really important for a cyclist, and med balls kind of teach that in a way, or any kind of throw or something like that kind of teaches that in a way that when you have them do it and then you kind of bring it back to, how what you're doing when you're sprinting on your bike, for example. I use this example all the time of you can take anybody that's never been in a gym before and put them in a leg press machine, and they can press, 300-400 pounds usually pretty easily.
Hmm.
Load that on a squat rack, it's not going to go well for them. So because they don't have the ability to support that weight and move under that weight, the leg strength is not the limiting factor there. But so on the bike, we have to create that platform to push from because we don't have, our hips aren't fixed on something. And we do that through the amount of tension we can create in our core and our grip on the handlebars, right? So when we get out of the saddle, that's a full body movement. We're locking down the upper body to put power into the pedals. When you're doing a med ball throw, you're kind of doing the same thing. You're bracing your core, you're using your limbs to get that ball to go in whatever direction you want it to go in. And, moving under a load and creating stability under a load is a fundamental skill for any sport.
I love what you said before about throws, that they teach you how to use your body as, one unit. And it's true. It's you don't really have a choice, right? And
Right.
obviously you can coach it to some extent, but it's almost like a natural pattern, if you will, that just needs to be expressed at some point. And again, you can, refine the details and push from the hip or coordinate in that way. But in the end, it's just everything working together. And I like when you said, power wins races. And so being able to generate force quickly is something that we need to not forget. So the strength part, obviously the max strength is very important, but then bringing all this, and I guess you could start to say that it goes closer towards what you're going to need for cycling, but it's still a skill in and of itself, right? Being able to be explosive with your upper body, with your lower body, with your whole body is something that anybody needs, right? And whether it's athletes, whether it's Gen Pop clients, everybody can benefit from knowing how to slam a ball hard into a wall or down into the ground, and those things will translate, overall to be able to use your body better.
Right. And it's the thing that most endurance athletes neglect is that explosive power
Mm.
because yeah, we're out riding our bike all day or running or whatever it happens to be. And we don't access those fast twitch muscle fibers as often as we probably should to meet the demands of our sport. Most people hate doing, sprint training on their bike unless they're natural sprinters and are good at it. Um, But if you teach them how to move in the gym and how to take advantage, you're not going to take somebody who's not a natural sprinter and make them, you know, a sprinter necessarily, but you can improve them. Um, and durability is something that's really talked about in cycling now. That's kind of one of the buzzwords. And I think there's a lot of people that just write themselves off like, well, I'm not a good sprinter, but like, is that really true? Because like sprinting at the end of like a 60-minute criterium is really different than sprinting at the end of like a 4-hour road race.
Mm. Mm.
And, not to bore people with my mid-level accomplishments, but like I would never win a crit in a sprint, but I've won long road races in a sprint because like my sprint is the same at 60 minutes as it is at 4 hours. It's not particularly impressive at 60 minutes, but it's the same at 4 hours. So and it took me a long time to figure that out. Like I spent a lot of years just like, I'd be in a 3 or 4 man break and just resign myself. Well, I'm going to get third or fourth, and I wouldn't even really try. But once I kind of figured out, like, durability wasn't really something talked about then, but like I kind of figured out like, I can kind of do the same thing, deep into a race that I can do in the first, hour of the race. And the gym kind of teaches you that, and especially like these coordinated efforts, like heavy carries and ball throws. teach your body to operate as a system.
Talk a bit more about the carries that you use. Like you said, there's many different variations, but how do you typically structure them in a session? What distance are you going to use? What kind of weight are you going to be using depending on the athlete or the person?
Yeah, so we do in our gym, like our squat rack is kind of in the middle of the gym. So I have people do laps around the squat racks,
Yeah.
and it's probably 30 meters,
Okay.
all the way around. And so for like the goal for like a farmer carry is I want people to be able to do body weight farmer carries,
Mm,
for five rounds of that. So 30 meter carries. So they'll do a carry, put it down, kind of shake their hands out, do it again.
mm.
Um, and as you know, when you're doing a really heavy carry, I don't need to give you the cue of brace your core, engage your shoulders. That stuff kind of takes care of itself. But I also find like if you're pointing that out, like while they're doing it, like this is what's going on, and this is what you should be thinking about when you're sprinting on the bike or getting out of the saddle, locking down everything else so that the thing that you want to move is moving at the maximum force and maximum efficiency that you can generate. Um, carries kind of teach that in a way that you can explain it, you can get out a whiteboard and draw pictures, but until you actually do it, I think most people if you have someone that's never done like a farmer carry before, and even if they do a heavy weight, all right, carry that for 30 meters. They'll carry it for 30 meters, like, all right, that was kind of hard, but like, how does that really translate? By the time they've done five of those, they get progressively worse,
And to your point, I was laughing while you were saying this because I was reminded of my early CrossFit days when you would just, pick a workout and just try it and it was way too hard, but you would do it anyway. And
Mhm.
for anybody who doubts the fact that a carry is a whole body exercise, I don't think I've ever been as sore as when I just gotten rings, I believe, and I strapped the ring because I didn't have anything to really carry. So I just strapped the ring to a couple plates. And I think I had just bought some Olympic 25 kgs. So I had a 25 and a 20. So I had 40, it was 90 pounds a hand. And I had a 400-meter circle around my block. And I did that two or three times. And obviously my grip was completely trash. But the couple following days, I don't think I've ever been so sore in my whole upper body through my core. I mean,
Right.
everything was done for. And obviously there was no progressive overload. It was just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks, and it was a bad idea. But yeah, it's validates what you were saying here. It's a very complete exercise, and it's a pretty basic skill to develop. You don't there's very little technique to it as long as you get the basics right. And then, like you said, you can vary them in an infinite amount of ways, different implements, maybe even the thickness of your grip on whatever you're going to be using,
Mhm.
right? And so that's something you can use in perpetuity and never really get bored because there's always another variation to use.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's, also like that's why I like front squats because
Mm.
like I think, everything comes from the core, and you can teach someone to do a back squat, and they can if you're a bad teacher and they have bad movement patterns, they don't really learn how to engage the core the way they probably should. But with same thing with a front squat, if you're holding a weight in front of you, your core is fully engaged. Like you don't have a choice.
Yeah, and I think that's where, picking the right exercise for the right person is super important, right? Everybody wants to go straight to the back squat, but it's actually a very strenuous position to be in. It's not obviously dangerous if you do it properly, but like you said, putting the weight in front, it just forces you almost in the right position, right?
Yeah, and so I love picking exercises like that are kind of checking multiple boxes. Like in my programs, we do very, very little like isolated core work because, by the time you've done a bunch of front squats and a bunch of carries and maybe some kettlebell swings, like your core is pretty fried at that point. So you don't need to do, a bunch of endless crunches or, planking for 5 minutes or things like that. Um, so that I really like to think about that in my program design of like, you know, compound movements are everybody's friend. We want to be using as many muscle groups as possible, and also like really teaching how to lock down your core but still be able to move.
Mhm. And going back to one of the movements you mentioned, doing the pull up, it's a great whole body movement, at least upper body, and then implicating your core, right? You can obviously do it without bracing, but once you
Hmm.
do and you try to, just point your feet forward just a little bit and keep it all in line, really becomes a whole body exercise, and you can really feel it. For somebody who's maybe trying to go towards a pull up, what's your progression, and how would you get someone who can't do a pull up today to get one in a few weeks or in a few months?
So we start with isometrics. So like just hanging, holding the top position. And then we progress that to negatives. So like going down as slow as you, not necessarily as slow as you can. Like what I see when you tell someone to go as slow as you can, they go slow, 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 and then they kind of lose it. So like I want them to be consistent, whatever
Mm,
the speed is. Like, not like a free fall, but like if they're going like this kind of pace down, that's fine as long as they're doing the full range of motion and keeping engagement. And yeah, and I try to teach them use that hollow body position when you're doing those negatives because I think one of the big things that keeps a lot of people from being able to do a pull up is they don't know how to engage their core properly to access their lats and to really retract their scapula and get the lats involved. Like I always tell people, like if you want to see a perfect pull ups, like watch a female athlete that's really good at pull ups because female athletes really had to learn the technique to get their first pull up because they just, they don't have the natural upper body mass that a guy does. And a lot of guys can just muscle through a pull up just on bicep strength alone and never even engage their lats. So even though they may be able to do a lot of them that way, they're not really good pull ups. So watch somebody that didn't have a choice. They had to learn it the right way
mm.
to get good at them. So using that, so we'll do negatives, static holds. I'm not really a huge fan of banded pull-ups because I think they get you really good at doing banded pull-ups, but don't really get you any closer to doing an actual pull-up.
Yeah, especially because the resistance profile is such that it will help you the most at the bottom, which
Yep.
is the hardest part of the pull up
Yeah.
typically, and people can't get out of the hole. And so, if that's the part where you get the most help, where this is where you should try to get the strongest, it's almost a little bit counterproductive in that way, right? I think they can probably be interesting for adding some volume if you're trying to just get more reps in once you can
Yes.
do a proper one, right? But
Yep.
like you said, on the way to your first pull ups, it might actually maybe hinder your progress a little bit.
Yeah. So, and then also we'll have them do like just like scapular retractions.
Mm,
So I'll start them, somebody that's never done a pull up, we'll do like maybe 3 sets of three negatives, do a couple of like 30-second holds or, whatever they can do do some holds at the top and then a couple of scapular retractions. And then for volume, some plank pulls or something like that. So we're still working similar muscle groups and,
mm,
in a different angle, but they're getting that volume at least to get those muscles online and to kind of learn the firing patterns because that's the other part of it is coordinating all of that to actually get that first pull up.
yeah.
And it's amazing when you see somebody that's like struggling. They get that first pull up, and then like all of a sudden now they're doing 4 or 5 pull ups. Like the first one is your first pull up's the hardest pull up you'll ever do, but then it's like when breaking the 4 minute mile. Bannister breaks the 4 minute
Mm.
mile, and then a week later, like 4 other guys broke it.
Yeah, and I guess it's the difficult thing with the pull up itself as a movement to unlock. It's that until you can do it, you can't do much volume with it directly, right? You have to, like you said,
Yeah.
go through indirect means of the isos and the eccentrics. But then once you can start doing one, then you can start even just doing clusters of singles, and then you can start doing doubles, and then you can find strategies to get the reps in. Because at the end of the day, that's really what's going to get you there, right? It's the reps that you put in, it's the hours that you do on the bike. It's really just the consistent work over time. And sometimes I feel like we're a little bit losing the plot a little bit because we're always looking for the details. And obviously, focusing on the details has its place, but it can't be at the expense of the overall goal, which is don't get hurt. train regularly, and then just progress over time. That's kind of the main things, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the magic in any program is just consistency and stringing together days, weeks, months, years of not being injured, not getting sick, and just stacking those bricks. I love that saying of stacking bricks when it comes to fitness.
No, absolutely. You said that you were currently interested in blood flow restriction, BFR. Can you talk a little bit about what it is for those who don't know about it, and then why it might be interesting for some people?
Yeah, blood flow restriction is something that I kind of stumbled onto a few years ago. I don't remember where I first saw it, but it's the concept is you occlude the blood, so you put a band or like around your arm or your leg, and you want it tight enough so that the artery is not cut off, so blood can come into the limb, but it can't go back through the veins. So it takes a minute to kind of figure out how tight to get it. There's calibrated ones now that you can get, but like everything, you can overcomplicate it and spend a lot of money, or you can literally just get like a rubber band and tie it around your arm. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that per se, but by occluding the venous return, the muscle gets hypoxic really quickly. You generate a lot of hydrogen ions, a lot of lactic acid, so you feel the burn for lack of, but it tricks your muscles into thinking that it's doing more work than it is. And the other key to this, when you're doing blood flow restriction, you typically do very lightweight, like 30% of what you would normally do for a given lift. And you're doing high repetitions, 15 to 30 reps, depending on, what protocol you're following. But it's a great way to train through injuries. Like I currently am dealing with some back issues. I've got a herniated L4, L5. So heavy squats, heavy deadlifts are not on my menu right now. So I've been doing a lot of blood flow restriction work with squats and even light deadlifts. And it's been remarkable in the amount of strength I've been able to retain, but also improve on doing this. And I've been using it. Some of my athletes are doing this like when they're on long like race blocks where they're not going to be able to get to a gym for a while. They'll bring some blood flow cuffs and they'll do that 1 or 2 times a week just to maintain while they're on these long race blocks. And the feedback I'm getting from my athletes that do it, they like it. It's not something you'd want to do, in my opinion, like, that shouldn't be your only modality of training. But if you're injured, it's a fantastic tool because I can really work my legs and blow them up with just using body weight and not putting any strain on my back. Um, I've used them for like people that have like I've had a few athletes that have had ACL surgeries and ACL injuries in the last few years, and using blood flow restriction there has been a real game changer because they with ACL, the protocols with ACL is they want you moving more now, like quickly
Mm.
after the surgery, so they can do a lot of stuff uh, post surgery pretty quickly with just body weight, or even just like lying, just doing like leg extensions, things like that with the blood flow thing cuffs on, within following their physical therapist guidelines of what their range of motion is and so forth. Um, and also, like if you have an arm that's completely immobilized and you really can't load the other, you can do single arm work on the non-injured side, and that's the science is pretty clear on that it's going to reduce the amount of atrophy you're going to see on the injured side of things.
Mm. Yeah, the brain works in a almost like communicating vases way, and whatever you do on one side feeds into the other as well. I'd never thought about it that way, but I guess we could maybe draw a parallel between BFR regarding strength work and heat training in the way that
Mhm.
we're reducing the external load but increasing the internal load at the same time. So it allows you to essentially have more metabolic stress with a lower either weight or wattage on the outside, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's a really quick, efficient workout. So, and you can like I said, you can travel with them. But yeah, it's like I love, like, I hate the term biohacking, but like this because it implies that there's shortcuts, and as you and I both know, there's no shortcuts to strength and fitness. But this is somewhat of a hack in that you're kind of tricking your body into thinking it's doing more than it is.
Mm,
So you're able to operate, even when you're injured at a higher level than you would have been able to do otherwise. So
mm,
it's a fantastic tool for that. And it's also, I've been using it for, like, I have golfer's elbow in both. I don't play golf, but I've been doing a lot of pull-ups lately. So I've been
mm,
getting some tendonitis. Um, and I've been using it just to kind of I'll just put them on, and I'll just do some curls with no weight just to get a bunch of blood in that joint. And to me, it's been working pretty well. And I just saw Kelly Starrett now has a program where he talks about using that for, for joint injuries. So it's interesting to have the validation from somebody like that. But
mm.
I kind of just intuitively thought it made sense to, like, well, let's just get a bunch of blood in there that wouldn't be there otherwise, and just keep flush, doing that, fill flush cycle. And so it's definitely helped a lot for, my own personal, like, chase of I'm trying to get good at pull-ups again.
Yeah, yeah, because there's a time and a place for the muscle tension and for the neuromuscular drive. But at some point, you need the blood flow, you need the oxygen, you need the nutrients that are going to come and feed all of this, right? And if you're lacking one of those two, then you're probably going to be at a deficit at some point. And it's an interesting way to bridge that gap. And like you said, do more work with less strain, essentially.
hmm
When it comes to everyday life outside of the gym, outside of work, what do you gravitate to? What helps you find the balance between everything that you do with work, with training, and then the rest of it?
I have a dog that's awesome. Like, getting a dog has been one of the best kind of reset tools that I've ever had in turn for a lot of different things. Just like, people want to overcomplicate, like, recovery. Going for a walk is probably one of the best recovery things you can do, no matter what your sport is. And when you have a dog, you're going to walk, if you're a good dog owner, you're going to walk twice a day, every single day, whether rain or shine. And so just from a physical standpoint, that's an amazing thing. But, like, also just going out with like, dogs are always excited. Like, no matter what we're doing, it can be pouring rain. And, like, I ask you want to go for a walk? He is so psyched. And it just it allows you to just kind of see the world from a different lens of, like, you know what? Yeah, this is actually pretty awesome that we can go out and play in the rain. Like, dogs are never in a bad mood, and they're always excited for what's next. And so it sounds corny, but I really, really like that. I like spending time with my dog. I really like my wife too. Don't get me wrong. And that's something we do together.
Yeah, don't forget her in that. Don't forget her
Yeah.
in the conversation. It's again, I'm laughing because we just got a dog 9 months ago, and
hmm
it's changed my life in the same exact way. Especially now with the nature of my work changing, spending more time on the computer, which I'm not a big fan of, but it allows us to do what we love every day. And one of the things was that I was moving a lot less. And so getting a dog and having to go out with him, like you said, every day, twice a day at least, rain
Yeah.
or rain or pour, it's a great thing. And I think developing that connection as well, outside of work and on primal came to mind, but it's more like on a fundamental level, right? There is no there. It's unconditional love, and I
hmm
think I see a lot of parallels between dogs and children in that way. And I think it's just such a beautiful relationship that you can build over time and just build a confidence and you don't speak the same language, but they understand a lot more than we think. And at the end of the day, it's everybody wins, right? Especially if you're able to establish that connection. What breed dog do you have?
A Labrador, yellow lab.
Did you get
And
him small or did you get an older one already?
No, he was 8 months old when we got him.
8 months.
I had labs previous to that, so I've had dogs for like the last 20 years or so. But yeah, this one we had just lost our previous dog. She was 16 and finally,
Mm.
it was her time. And we weren't looking for, we both decided, well, let's go a year without a dog and we can travel a little more. Like literally like 2 days after we put Kira down, my wife's sister calls like, "Hey, I have a friend who they got this lab and one of the kids is allergic to it and they need to rehome him. I know it's probably too soon." And we're both like, "No, yeah, you're right. It's too soon." And then she sent us a picture and like, God. Then we went and met the dog. And so, yeah, we lasted like almost a week without a dog.
That's a record and a half. Yeah, it's funny. I was very reluctant to getting a dog for the longest time because I was the first to say, "Oh, we don't have time," or "It's not going to work." And then say my wife, a friend, shout out to Ashley for bringing this beautiful dog into our life. His name is Bo, and she worked at a shelter and volunteered at a shelter, and she messaged my wife and she said, this dog just came in and you need to come see him. So my wife went, she spent some time with him, and then she said, "Sean, let's go and see him together." And once I saw him, I just couldn't say no. And again, I've never had a dog. We've never had a dog before, but it's been an incredible adventure, and going along with him and seeing his behavior change even still 9 months in. We were talking about this yesterday. He's still changing and he's still evolving. He was 4 when we got him, and he's had a pretty rough past, let's say. But you can see him evolve, and that's something again that's very very fundamental. I think in our relationships. What else do you use to balance out your life outside of those walks, time with your wife, time with the dog?
Yeah, I'm a big music fan. I spend a lot of time listening to and looking for music. I play guitar badly, but but yeah, I spend a lot of time seeking out new music, and I have a pretty broad musical palette, but I always kind of gravitate towards like the heavier stuff. One of the things Keegan Swenson and I we spend a lot of time like sending bands back and forth, like check this out, and it's always like really really heavy stuff. Keegan's super. He makes like these epic like 9 hour long playlists on Spotify for for his training rides.
What's
But it's good because he's significantly younger than me, so he's a lot more in tune with like the new stuff. Like
mm,
I'm kind of a dinosaur when it comes to music. I listen to my all the bands that like are my go-tos are 20, 30, 40 years old at this point.
so
So it's good to get some perspective from
what are
from somebody
your
younger.
go-tos from years past? Let's say like 3 or 5 bands from years past, and then some more recent stuff that you've discovered that you enjoy.
I mean, my all-time go-to number one is Van Halen. Like that.
Mm,
That's what I grew up on. Like Eddie Van Halen is like the pinnacle. Like when I think of mastery, Eddie Van Halen's it. Like he's the all-time number one celebrity for me. And I'm not a celebrity worship kind of guy, but I would totally fanboy if I ever got to meet Eddie Van Halen, which I did not, sadly. Um, so that's definitely the go-to, and kind of all the 80s hair metal like that was that was when I was in my prime.
right.
More recent stuff, Keegan's introduced me to like In Flames.
Mm,
Oh God, what's that band? Slaughter to Prevail. I really like
okay.
right now. And then not they're not super well, they are like Meshuggah is kind of a like
Mm,
a that I was never really into them when they first came out, not because I didn't like, I just wasn't exposed to them. And they're kind of a more of a recent discovery, even though they've been around for 30 years. That's really a frequent one in my playlist right now.
yeah. Do you try and pull out the guitar and play some of the rest sometimes, or do you have some typical songs
Yeah.
that you like to play?
Yeah. I mean, again, I can butcher most of the Van Halen songs, not the solos, but the rhythm part. Um, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, that kind of stuff. Like that's what I learned to play guitar with. And then yeah, the newer stuff, the Meshuggah stuff is tough. They use weird tunings that I don't have a good enough ear to tune my guitar like that.
Right, right.
But Lamb of God is another big
Mm.
one. I like playing their stuff. But then I also, Stevie Ray Vaughan is another, like that was, I saw Stevie Ray Vaughan in 1984, and that was literally like well, life-changing experience, like just like unbelievable. So yeah, the guitar, like you definitely don't want to hear me play guitar because I'm not good, but it's fun and it's relaxing.
I won't ask you to pull the guitar out right now. No, it's interesting. I'm very much into music as well. My dad used to be a musician. He was a guitar player, a singer, and so I've always grown up with music and kind of always listened to it, but then stopped playing it for a while. And I find that now we just actually got an electric drum set for Christmas for my son and myself. I play it more than he does now, but I find that it's a great way to get out of the training and the work that we do. Because although we love what we do, whether it's in the gym, whether it's writing programs or coaching athletes, it's I find it very important to have that balance and have things outside of this that help us come back hungry to do it again. It's like training, right?
Yeah,
If you're not hungry to train, then you're probably missing either recovery or balance somewhere. And it's the same for us. If we're tired, getting up and doing our job every day, then it's probably that we're missing something on the outside. And for me, the music box has definitely helped by bringing that in a little bit. It means I need to work a bit less every day, but again, the goal is to do it forever. So if that's what
yeah,
it takes, then that's a good thing, right?
yeah, and it's just super fun. Oh, and you're in Switzerland, right?
Correct.
So yeah, Celtic Frost and Triptychon, shout
Right.
out Tom Warrior, like one, yeah, super all-time band for me as well.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
awesome. Well, Art, that was a fun conversation. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I messaged you and you were very responsive right away. So, really fun to be able to connect with you and get to know your world a little bit more. If people are interested in learning more about what you do and maybe getting in touch with you, where can they find you?
yes, new website, WooCar Fit. Just I had a website before and I got hacked, and long story. And also Instagram, WooCar Fit. Like I'm
Mm,
pretty active on Instagram in terms of like returning direct messages and things like that.
I can attest to that.
Um, yeah. I'm not as active as posting stuff as I should be, but I'm working on that as well because thanks to you and other podcasters, I'm starting to get a little bit of exposure. Social media doesn't come natural to me, but it is part of the world we live in, and it's part of the game that we have to play.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to
Indeed.
embrace it as best I can.
Well, that's awesome, man, and it's great to see you, pushing forward with, I guess, the things that you've been using for decades now. And like you said at the beginning, you were a little bit early, but
Yeah.
it turned out fine in the end, and people have caught up to you, and now you've been doing the right stuff for a long time, and it's good to see it pay off in many ways. So it was great to get to know you a little bit, and maybe, who knows, maybe I'll see you in person one day.
I hope so. And and also thank you for this opportunity, and thanks for reaching out because I'd not heard of your podcast previously, and I've d dug into like you're doing some really good stuff there. At least the ones I can understand. I don't speak French, so
I appreciate it, man. It's been a great, fun journey for me talking to coaches, athletes, researchers. I mean, for me, it's been my continuing education, like I say, for many years now. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for all the great people like you that I've been able to exchange with. And I really believe that exchanging and sharing is a really important way to grow, and that we need as much as we can in this world where people are turning against each other, unfortunately. So if we can, shine some positivity and share around common passions, it's something pretty powerful that we need to push forward.
100%. We're more alike than we are different. So
100%. Thank you so much,
yeah.
Art. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sean. All right. Thank you.
I want to tell you a little bit more about this podcast sponsor. All You Need Nutrition is a high-quality supplement brand proudly made in France. When they first reached out to me, my wife, who's a trained nutritionist, had a lot of questions about the different ingredients that they use. So we scheduled a call with Miriam, the mastermind behind the entire All You Need product line. After the call that lasted almost 2 hours, my wife was really impressed by their transparency and the quality of their products. She was excited to work with a brand like All You Need. And if my wife says yes to a supplement brand, I'm on board without hesitation. Personally, I love their whey protein. I use it after every strength session or mix it in with my yogurt in the morning when I want a little extra protein. It's not too sweet, the cocoa flavor is delicious, and it blends really well. Their one product is fantastic if you're looking for a light energy boost plus all the vitamins and minerals you might need if you're used to training hard. My wife sticks to 1 scoop, but I go for 2. Make sure you find the dose that works for you. And special shout out to their shaker bottle. It's literally the best shaker I've used in the past 15 years. We've been using their supplements for the last 2 months and we're genuinely thrilled to be working with them. If you want to support the podcast, click the link in the description to check out their whole product line and use the code UPSIDE for 10% off on your next order with All You Need Nutrition. Take care and see you in the next episode.